Hello, Paul Pounds. So today I want to talk about Futura books, and I've got good reason to. I think for the past couple of years I've been avidly collecting Futura horror paperbacks, and also I tend to lurk around on horror paperback blogs and websites and stuff, really to pick up suggestions for stuff that I haven't read or didn't know about. And there seems to be like an established hierarchy of cult quality. At the top is New English Library, which I can't dispute because bloody love New English Library. Next, quite close to that, is Hamlin, which again, I love Hamlin, so I can't dispute that. But somewhere near the bottom is Futura. And I think they published some corkers, and they made some mistakes. And I think I've kind of sussed out a little bit where Futura went wrong, and I think it's a mistake that's still continuing to affect their credibility in 70s and 80s horror book fan circles. So Futura started in 1973, and they're the paperback imprint of the Little Brown Group. And they published everything in the late 70s and through the 80s. Yes, they had popular fiction. They had a lot of, and I don't know how to describe these books nicely. No book is disposable, but they published a lot of like disposable books, joke books and humour and quiz books, and almost books you buy for people when you don't know what else to buy them. They did an awful lot of film and TV tie-ins, some of which are very cool, and some, again, as that TV show's been forgotten a little bit, then the paperback gets forgotten. They did a lot of, again, I'm not being derogatory, they did a lot of easier read biographies, nothing too heavy or massively in depth. Eric and Ernie and Doris Stokes. And they seem to hit, like, they've hit a couple of lucrative authors, like the historical mystery whodunits by Ellis Peters and things like that. They did publish all the new Avengers novelizations, so that's a credit in my book. And they also published my beloved Confessions books. I don't even read them for spicy reasons. It's not even that. They're just funny and cheesy nonsense. If I want something actually spicy, I know where I can find that. That's, it's not like I've hidden them in a box under my bed kind of thing. They're just fun. Don't judge me. So they've never been one of the heavy hitters in horror. And through the 80s, they did have some pretty big horror names. But there ain't a lot of love for Futura. And I think it boils down to a few things. First off is some of their covers for their horror books. They went with a more graphical style at a time when other publishers were still doing beautiful painted covers or cheesy and wonderfully dated photo covers. Futura went with, this kind of odd graphic style, which at the time I think probably looked quite striking. And then as graphic designers moved on, it maybe fell out of favour a bit, personally, I kind of think it's come round again, and they're just nice, simple, stylish, striking covers with that 80s vibe, that 80s graphic style. Another thing I think currently that goes against them in terms of cult popularity is that they reprinted a lot of American books published by Zebra and Avon and publishers like that. And New English Library and Hamlin embraced a lot of British authors. And I think living in the UK, being a Brit, having things set in our fair native isle excuses quality sometimes. And if something's set in America and it's not high quality, if it's not the best story, personally, as a reader, I find I lose interest quicker if it's not set somewhere that's relevant to me. So, for example, the movie Psychomania. I adore Psychomania. It's one of my top 10 favourite films ever. But it's not the best film. And I think one thing that gives it, that I love about it, is that even if the film isn't great, you can still enjoy a gang of living dead bikers tearing up the pedestrian precinct out the front of Rumbelows. It gives it something, for me. That might just be me. I might just be on my own with that. But if something's set in the United Kingdom, it gives it a different kind of relevance for me. And New English Library and Hamlin really embraced that and published a lot of authors that set their stories in Britain. Another thing that goes against them is that Futura didn't necessarily embrace the sleaze and gore that was popular. And I think if you're looking back as a nostalgic reader, which most of us, I think, are, you look at a book and your brain just says that's going to be bonkers, that's going to be off the chart, it's going to be a crazy, rubbish but wonderful thrill ride of chaos, mayhem, bloodshed, everything we love. And at this point in the 80s, that whole thing of quiet horror was starting to become popular. And I think Futura really embraced that. Authors like Charles L. Grant and Stephen King that had a real gentle unfolding and unease and tension building. I mean, Futura did publish a lot of Charles L. Grant's stuff in the 80s. It was kind of Hamlin first and then Futura. And it's almost like you could compare Futura to New English Library and Hamlin. No disrespect to any authors ever, but it's almost like New English Library and Hamlin were the B features, the B movies, and Futura tried to be A features, main features. And I think when we're looking back at that era of horror, the standout things, the standout stories, films or books, other than like a handful of things like The Exorcist and Halloween and stuff like that, I don't know, like, are the B features fondly remembered? The ones that aren't quite as good but are gloriously trashy and Bonkers, they're the ones that I look back on fondly and enjoy seeing. And even if it's a fairly rubbish film, if it's got some ridiculous moments in it, that carries my interest. And I think once you get your head round that quiet horror thing, there's some wonderful and brilliant books to discover in Futura's back catalogue. But you've got to remember they're not what they promise. And that, I think, is one of the main reasons that Futura don't have the cult respectability that other publishers from that era do. Let's have a look at Worms by James Montague. Obviously, there's going to be some reference or themes of Montague Rhodes James in there. That's going to happen. But it was actually written by a chap called Christopher Wood, who, oddly enough, wrote another series of books for Futura that I'm very fond of. Yes, it's Killer Worms. But if you read it alongside some of the other nature attack books from that era, it's very different, and you're not going to get what you're expecting. The Killer Worms provide narrative assistance. They help move the story along, but they're not the story. And I'm trying to do it without spoilers. The story is not what you're expecting. And the story, I think, is not what you're prepared for as a reader. So you grab Worms off your shelf and think, brilliant, worm apocalypse. Without too many spoilers, they're nuclear worms, which is the best thing ever. So you grab that and you're thinking you're going to get something like Eat Them Alive or the Crabs books, or, well, there's so many to choose from where nature went bonkers and attacked us. But you don't get that. You do get something thoroughly enjoyable and sinister and strange and unpleasant. And it is a well-written book. But you don't get the worm apocalypse that your brain's reaching for. And for me, the times when I've experienced entertainment that has promised one thing and delivered something else, I might be a bit shallow in this, but I've not really enjoyed it. For example, I remember buying a VHS of a film called Zombie Aftermath back when I was collecting rare and banned movies, and it looked ace, and I was like, oh yeah, got it home, and it's a post-apocalypse movie with no zombies in it, which oddly enough I watched again during this current lockdown for the first time in like 25 years or so, and thoroughly enjoyed it because I knew it wasn't a zombie apocalypse movie from the early 80s. It was something totally different. And Futura books trip you up like that. So, whatever Futura book you're going to read, there's a good chance it's not what you're expecting. So go in totally open-minded. There's ones like The Landlady by Constance Rauch. Rauch? R-A-U-C-H. Rauch? Rauch? But the cover promises a mind-wrenching tale of malevolent horror. It's not. It's quiet horror, going back to that quiet horror thing. it gently unfolds. It's gloomy and ominous, and there's constant hints that something unpleasant is going on. And I think if they'd played that up a little bit, I know it was difficult in the 80s because everything was full on and neon and bright and flashy and splashy gore, and there you go. But I think if Futura had taken that more subtle horror approach and kind of said, you know, it's a nice creepy book that's going to gently unfold in front of you, then I don't think they'd have the I think they would have more respect as a horror publisher than maybe they do now, because that's okay. I love Lucio Fulci movies. I love Umberto Lenzi movies. But sometimes I just want a cup of tea and watch Seance on a Wet Afternoon and just enjoy that gentle sinisterness unfolding. I don't need eye gouging. I don't need gut chomping. I don't need cannibals and zombies. Sometimes you just want something that's almost a bit more relaxing than intense. And I think if Futura had taken that approach, they would have garnered a lot more interest and respect from cult 80s horror fans. Having said that, there's always bits of fun that pop up and surprise you, like Necromancer by Robert Holstock. Now, this book is problematic. This book reflects attitudes and ideas towards gender and disability that aren't reflected by our society. But as I said before in my videos, and as I constantly say in my videos, if you engage with entertainment from that era, there's going to be attitudes and ideas and language that could possibly sometimes leave a bit of a bad taste in your mouth. Having said that, Robert Holstock wrote the Night Hunter series, which is going to be a future video, which, oh my word, they are wonderful. So Necromancer's a kind of classic British horror story of possession, but working in that feeling that things like Children of the Stones, I don't know if you've seen that TV series, but if you haven't, I think it's all on YouTube. Go and check it out. It is a kids series, but it's sinister. It's got that unpleasant, lovely 70s sinisterness to it. But in the middle of all this, you've got tough, rugged Californian history doctor Lee Klein kind of trying to solve a terrifying mystery. And in all honesty, I've never read a book that contains a character as much like Rick Douglas from Dark Place. It's brilliant and bonkers and an archetypal junky 80s horror novel. And I mean that, as I always say, in an affectionate and loving way, because I love this lowbrow nonsense. So Futura didn't always keep it kind of classy, gentle, quiet horror. They did have some trash, but they didn't kind of exploit that cover-wise. The cover of Necromancer doesn't grab you. in the way that a ridiculous, trashy horror book does. It's almost like Futura got it the wrong way round. And the ones that aren't that trashy have got trashier covers, and the ones that are deliciously trashy, they've got more straightforward covers that would suggest it's a kind of less intense book. And even ones that have got a bit of a reputation as being something cool and trashy, like The Snake Orchards by Drew Lamarck, who was Andre Launay, who, if you check him out on Wikipedia, he had loads of pseudonyms. He's written some pretty cool stuff. Even that, it's not snakes in an orchard. It's not that, like, we're battling for survival against snakes in an orchard, which would have been cool, and that's kind of what you've come to expect from that kind of book, with its design and cover art and style. It throws other things in there and tells other stories, which I think is really lovely. But over the past couple of years of avidly collecting Futura horror books from the 80s, I've come to expect you just don't presume anything. You don't judge a book by its cover, which I think when you collect 80s horror paperbacks, or 70s and 80s horror paperbacks, I think you're allowed to judge a book by its cover. There's not many instances in life where it's like, go ahead, judge that book by its cover. But when you collect this kind of trashy pulp paperbacks, I think you're allowed to. I think you're encouraged to judge a book by its cover. Price-wise, they're a little bit all over. There's a lot that you can pick up for a couple of quid, and I think that's one of the ways I got into collecting Futura books, because a lot of other 80s horror paperbacks are creeping up in value. There's a couple of Futura ones that are a bit more expensive. They're quite difficult to track down, really, because on a lot of the websites for book collectors, people have written guides for New English Library and Hamlin, and there's big lists of, you can go through the list and sit down with whatever book search thing you use and just see what you can find on that list. And because Futura is not quite as well respected, I don't think they have a similar kind of list, not that I've found. But they are worth checking out, as long as you don't expect chaos and gore. You're going to get it in some of them, or you're going to get like chaos and gore opening, and then it levels out and you get this gentle story unfolding. But they are fun, and they are worth checking out, and they are worth tracking down. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, and thank you for watching, you lot, and I will see you all in the next video.